Greetings, programs, and welcome to the Awesome Friday podcast. I am your host. My name is Matthew, and joining me today is Simon.
just for a nice change.
Yeah, just for
I like how you're like, joining me today is Simon. It's like, oh, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Joining me today for a nice change of pace. We're doing exactly the same thing that we always do.
You're stuck with us again. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not Rachel, it's me. Hello. How wonderful of you to join us once more for our podcast. It's
Indeed.
very nice to have you come in, settle down. I've just made tea. I've just brewed a lapsang souchong that's got taken off the local tea place's menu because no one could drink it. That's my favorite tea. So
it's actually the least shocking thing you've said all day. And for contrast, I'm drinking cranberry juice out of a Cineplex cup.
That's so on brand.
Collectible, no way home Cineplex cup.
Wow.
Super
on brand for both of us.
Super on brand for both of us. Just before we get going properly, just so everyone knows, we did also just finish recording this week's bonus episode in which we asked each other questions. Simon asking about what's the most important movie decade, and me asking about filmmakers we get excited to see adaptations of existing material from. I thought it was an interesting conversation, and I hope you do too. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/MCSimpson for as little as $2 Canadian a month. I know, right? That's
surely can't be so cheap.
It's like 78 cents American at this point, or perhaps 30 pence, 25, whatever the decimalized version of a euro is. It's like 23. Or something like that. It's super cheap is all I'm trying to say, and you get to hear us talk more. So if you're into that kind of thing, great. And you know, if you like the show, check out the site, click on some links, and help us keep the lights on. We very much appreciate that. This week we're going to talk about 2 movies, but before that, what else have you been watching this week, Simon, that you're allowed to talk about? Because I have been watching several things that I'm not allowed to talk about yet, which is the whole thing.
Well, I am now up to date. One of your AI buddies is giving me some shade there.
Yeah, that was my watch chiming in because it thought it heard its name.
I do enjoy how your watch sounds like a classic English butler from an Agatha Christie movie.
I don't know what it is, but I don't like the default Siri voice. I don't. And the only other one that I do like is the British man. It's weird. There's an Australian.
Because you're Marvel coded.
There's a female Australian voice that's actually pretty good as well. But
can't take that seriously. You can't take the Australian accent seriously, though, can you?
I don't know. I think it does a pretty good job of the Australian uptick, which is how Australian accents can deliver any news and make it sound great.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you can't take it seriously. Yeah. They could say like the worst thing in an Australian accent. It's still funny. Yeah.
We made your appointment. We made your appointment for tomorrow for chemotherapy. And
morning, Matthew. This is your morning alarm. Time to wake up, you bastard.
Yeah.
So those are our terrible Australian accents. What have I been watching? I'm up to date with Ahsoka, and Color Me Shocked. It's fantastic. Really, really good. Apart from one late decision in episode 4 that I am just scratching my head over because it is terrible. But we don't need to talk about that. But by and large, it's so good. I feel like
it's also the choice you're talking about is not surprising. Like it's
not surprising at all. No,
if you think about the things that Star Wars has done, it's maybe the least surprising thing in the episode.
It's completely on brand. But the Andor was amazing as this political drama, but it wasn't really the fantastical side of Star Wars. This feels like a template for what Star Wars is but classic sort of high fantasy style Star Wars could be in the future. And Dave Filoni, suddenly I'm filled with optimism about Dave Filoni's future Star Wars movie, because he's not directing all of these, but he's like, I guess you can call him the showrunner. He's the guy.
He wrote literally all of them as well.
Right. And
I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but he also wrote all of them without Jon Favreau.
Yeah, and Robert Rodriguez. With this does circle back to what we were talking about. I love Robert Rodriguez, but when we were watching Mandalorian, I kind of mentioned maybe he and Favreau aren't the best people to be approaching this material, because Filoni has basically made Rebels. What would it be? Season
Season
4 of
5. Season
Rebels?
5.
Season 5. It's effectively Rebels season 5, and it is brilliant. It's
Yeah.
so good.
It's also, I think, one thing that he's done really well, and I think we talked about this before, but the way he approaches Star Wars does one thing I don't like, which is he does connect back to a lot of the existing lore, but he uses it as a stepping stone to build new stuff. Whereas I do feel like the Mandalorian uses it as a crutch to make their shit work.
Yeah.
I think that I saw a clip. We watched a documentary a couple weeks ago called "The Disturbance in the Force," and there's a clip in that show of Jon Favreau speaking to George Lucas and talking about how the Mandalorian's rifle is the same rifle, like they designed it based on the rifle that Boba Fett had in an animated segment of the Star Wars Holiday Special in like 19 whatever it was,
his first appearance.
And I feel like that, like, it's the Mandalorian. A lot of Star Wars is just that. It's like look at the thing we dragged up and look at it in reverence, and look at the deep cuts we made, and it doesn't work for me because it feels like in the same. And I think another great example of this is the more recent Ghostbusters movie, Afterlife.
Yeah.
They are. Someone else I follow on Twitter called them "Look at that thing" cinema. I recognize that thing from the other thing cinema. And what's interesting, and I know we make this comparison a lot, is that Star Trek is doing this as well, but it comes from a place of such utter like love, and especially in Lower Decks, where there's like a million deep cuts every 10 seconds. But they're doing it from such a place of love, and they're using it to like make a joke or tell a new story or something. And I feel like shows like The Mandalorian, stuff like what Favreau has done, for better or for worse, is make the universe smaller. Whereas Ahsoka and Rebels, and also the new Star Trek, use these references to try and make the universe bigger.
Yeah, Star Trek does a really good job of using its past as story points. I feel like they weave them into something meaningful, and that's often completely lacking from the touch points in Mandalorian. But I do think this is a Favreau approach to it, and it's kind of nice to see Filoni by himself not falling into that trap, because I didn't know during the Mandalorian with the three of them, I was kind of confused because Rebels was so good and then Mandalorian was so bad, and I was confused how Filoni can have different outputs with the same sort of core material. But it turns out I think it was not him that was the bad part. So hopefully this is a standard. Ahsoka's a really good template for where this could go now, and like good Star Wars could go from now.
And even just like if you're up to date on episode 4, like they're literally leaving the galaxy. Like they're literally not just like figuratively, but like literally expanding the universe in a way that I appreciate.
Yeah.
And
what have you?
And also, poor. I am so sad that Ray Stevenson has passed on. I've always loved him, but he is like so fucking good in this show.
I really like how his character is written, and I really like how he's portraying that character. It's really, really interesting. The Jedi losing faith, or anyone sort of losing faith in their own religion and turning a corner, is a really interesting point. And one of the characters in Rogue One, like the big guy with the guns, I always found it fascinating that he was a Jedi who just stopped believing in it and just started becoming this like gun-heavy mercenary. So chaotic good. And Ray Stevenson's on the similar kind of spectrum, except his faith destroyed him and he decided to be a mercenary, but for like bad people. And he's doing a really, really good job of not overplaying it. And actually, he shows us tons of vulnerability as well, which is a really interesting thing to show for someone who is coded as like one of the main villains, and I
There's
think it's
a
working
there's a
really, really well.
there's a great moment in the most recent episode where he's going to face off against Ahsoka with a lightsaber, and he legitimately looks afraid. And
Mm,
I thought that was a really interesting choice too, and one that makes sense because like he left the Jedi. His character has left the Jedi Order when he was very young, and so did
mm,
Ahsoka. But Ahsoka was like trained by Anakin Skywalker and a member of the Rebel Alliance, and like all of this other stuff. Like at this point she's a legendary character, and I think any bad guy that showed up and was like, "I'm not afraid of Ahsoka," is like just an idiot,
mm.
right? Like, uh, or the more common Star Wars trap, which is to say they're going to die because of their own hubris. Um,
He's kind of got elements of what I really liked about Kylo Ren, which is the truth, which is like the thing where he'll say something that is like, you've been afraid, like he calls out the failure of the Jedi and how restrictive it is and how much it's hurt people and how it needs to be let go, and it's hard to disagree with that, even
yeah,
though he's meant to be someone fighting the hero, and it's being handled really, really well.
yeah, it's like
I
that
really
that
like it.
moment that moment at the end of the episode 2, I think it is, when he's
Hmm.
like, Ahsoka is one of the last Jedi. It would be a shame to kill her, and someone's like, "Do I detect fear in your voice?" And he says, "No, just truth. Like it would be a shame.
Hmm.
It would be a shame to kill her. She's one of the last ones." Like it's a really interesting way to write it and to play it, and I very much appreciate it.
And there's a great moment in 4 as well. His line where oh, they're sending people to go and kill. They found them somewhere, and they're sending people. And he says something, and the witch is like, do you doubt?" And no, he's like, "Do you doubt their capabilities?" He's like, "No, I've just got too much experience of them." Like he knows that the Jedi's won't go down that easily. It's really well done.
Yeah.
He's fantastic, and I don't really know if I've seen him in much else, but he's brilliant in this. What a
I mean,
shame! What a
you
loss!
definitely have seen him
Yeah,
in stuff because he's been working for a long, long time. Uh,
yeah.
I mean, he's in the Marvel movies, like he's in the MCU, so you've definitely seen him.
Who is he in?
He's also the evil governor in RRR. Um, uh, what else? Yeah, in the Marvel movies, he's one of the Asgardians, one of the Warriors 3. Um,
Mm,
what else? Yeah, I think our RRR would be the most recent thing you would have seen him in for sure.
hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
as the like over the top governor of British governor of India. It's just ridiculous. If you have children that
yeah.
haven't watched the Divergent series yet, like you're about to see him a bunch when they eventually do. He's in one of the GI Joe movies, I think. Yeah, he's been in a lot. Is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And just let me reiterate for probably the bazillionth time. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch HBO's Rome because he's fantastic
Yes.
in that.
Yes.
Apparently, I haven't seen it, but apparently he was in the recent Das Boot TV show remake. I'm curious to watch that.
What? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What?
I think it was produced by German TV. It was on CBC here in Canada.
What?
I think it's like Sky One or something. One of the big like European brands made a remake, an 8-episode remake of Das Boot.
Oh shit.
It's actually, I think it's even more. I think it's like a couple of seasons worth.
Oh man. In our bonus episode, we talked about how the end of the conversation like changed me as a film watcher. The end of Das Boot absolutely can go on that list as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
apparently I just googled it, and yeah, it's like 26 episodes, and it's based on the original. It's not an adaptation of the film; it's an adaptation of the
mm,
original book and that book's sequel. Um, and I haven't seen it, but it's supposed to be good.
hmm.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you been watching that you can talk about? Like, what's your Sunday go to HBO shows with your wife now? What's your Sunday night TV?
We haven't been watching the HBO stuff the last little while, mostly because there's some stuff that I like that she does not. Um, she's not really into Winning Time, so I'll go back and watch it when it's all out at some point. I have mostly been watching, interestingly, last night's a great example of this. I couldn't sleep last night, so I watched 4 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. And
whoa, that's healthy.
I mean, it's just a thing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I am a big fan of Star Trek.
Star Trek. Really?
I know,
I've
right?
not heard you mention that before.
So, and I haven't watched a lot of Next Generation actually very recently. So I have been like, no, I haven't been watching in order. I watched like 4 episodes of season 6 like back to back to back last night, just because. So like I watched the one where the 2-parter where Picard gets held hostage by the Cardassians, and I watched the Moriarty sequel episode, which is I really like. Moriarty is a character in Star Trek in Next Gen where he's one of the ones where I wish he'd like also shown up in like Deep Space Nine, or maybe he could show up like now in Discovery, so I could like discover the file and he could come back, because I think he's a really fun character.
What's the best episode of Star Trek in any form? One episode.
Oh, that's an impossible question. That's
Well, you're gonna say
no.
none of them.
I mean, so I've thought about this before, and I thought about actually rewatching all of it, because there are some classic episodes in all of the franchises. I think it's I mean, in the original series, for me, it's an episode called Balance of Terror, which is the first time we ever see the Romulans, and it's basically a submarine battle the whole time.
That's really good. That's a really good episode.
In Next Gen, it's probably The Inner Light, which is an episode where it starts out with them finding a probe, and the probe like zaps Picard, and he lives a whole other life on this in this other society, and like has a family, and it turns out that the probe is a time capsule. It gives him all this experience so he can remember these people who are now extinct. It's a beautiful, heartbreaking episode of television. I mean, for Deep Space Nine, it's certainly it's In the Pale Moonlight, which is the episode that like really, if you're going to point at Deep Space Nine about how it's a lot more about shades of gray than black and white like other Star Trek is, this is the episode where Sisko is narrating his personal log about how he basically went against his own principles, and he can live with that fact to bring the Romulans into the Dominion War. It's a masterclass of performance by Avery Brooks, and it's probably the most Deep Space Nine episode. It is, it's by far the best episode of that show. You know, Voyager, I've never been a huge fan of Voyager, so I couldn't tell you what my favorite episode of that show is off the top of my head.
I like the concept of Voyager. I really like
so Voyager's
a long way away and trying to get home. That's just a really good idea.
Yeah, so Voyager, I wasn't a huge fan of it at the time, but I've been meaning to revisit it because I do recognize that it does have a lot of great stuff. It's sort of, for me at the time, I remember thinking that it kind of abandoned its concept pretty early on, in that like they had limited resources, and then by like season 3, they just don't have that problem anymore. What else? I mean, every episode of Lower Decks is great. Wow, yeah.
Are you going to choose one episode? Like, because you're dancing around
No,
this. Like,
I'm choosing like one episode per series. I'm not. I don't
no,
have
that's not what I.
one.
That's not what I asked though. You got to.
Yeah, the problem with Star Trek as opposed to Star Wars is that it is not one thing, right? So there's no.
Yeah, I understand absolutely. So what's your episode?
I mean, it's probably In the Pale Moonlight. It's got to be In the Pale Moonlight.
Oh, interesting. I actually haven't seen. That's one of the few I haven't seen that you talked about. I did not get on with Deep Space Nine, but that was a long time ago. I don't think I've watched it in decades in any form. I've just got cable TV, and there's one channel that shows a lot of Star Trek on repeat, so I'm sure it'll pop up at some point.
Yeah, it's all just been moved to. It's not on. Some of it's still on Netflix, but none of it's on Crave anymore. It's all on Paramount Plus, so that's another subscription I've had to pick up, which is frustrating.
Oh, but fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of good episodes of all of
Mm-hmm.
them. Enterprise would be an interesting one to talk about because I think the best episodes are almost certainly in seasons 3 or 4. Um,
Mm-hmm.
season 3 had one big long through arc, which it was good, and season 4 was made up of like 3 to 4 episode like mini arcs. So one of those like arcs is probably the best thing they did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I can think about this all day.
Mm-hmm.
There's an episode of the 70s animated series where Spock has to go back and make sure his younger self makes a choice. That's a great episode. It's a great timey-wimey episode. Yeah, there's and like I said, I think every episode of Lower Decks is fantastic. They're all for the same reason. That show is so funny and makes so much fun of Star Trek, but from a place of pure
Mm-hmm.
love, and I adore it
Mm-hmm.
for that.
Yes, it is really, really good.
In fact,
Even when I don't get 90% of the references, it's very good.
the most recent 2 episodes that just premiered of season 4, the first 2 episodes, sees the main characters all get promoted to Lieutenant JG, and it's like everything about those episodes, the way that handles those promotions, including a line from one of the characters being like, "Wait, you can just ask for things you deserve and you'll get them," and his commanding officer being like, "I guess so." Like, it's so wonderful and heartfelt, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
But
should
again,
we talk about our movies?
I've been thinking about this lately because I've been thinking about starting like another blog that's just Star Trek,
Of course.
I haven't done it yet. But
Oh my god, that's an epic undertaking for you.
yeah, I'll tell you about it later because it's a whole
Okay.
it's a whole thing.
Okay, deal.
Yeah. But we should probably talk about the things we came here to talk about. So let's do that. We're going to talk about 2 films today. One is going to be another summer catch up like we did last week. And then we're going to talk about a new film that played at the Venice Film Festival and will be debuting on Netflix in a week. So let's talk about the old one, the old one first. So Simon, why don't you take us through the basic plot? Because I know you loved this movie. Spoiler alert.
I love this movie. I'm not even going to hide how much I love this movie.
Yeah, so take us through the basic plot of The Meg 2, The Trench.
So, in The Meg 1, if you haven't seen it, the world's greatest actor, Jason Statham, fights and punches a giant shark into submission. And he saves a bunch of people, but not before the honorable Chinese actor dies an honorable death, saving everyone. In The Meg 2, it will shock you to learn that there's another Meg, but it's actually we join the movie where Jonas has become something of a eco warrior, where he's like boarding ships that are throwing radioactive waste into the ocean and fighting them all, being like a one-man James Bond super fighter, and getting rescued and planes scooping him up out of the ocean, and the whole like next chunk of the movie has really nothing to do with sharks whatsoever. They develop this technology that lets them dive down, and the whole concept is that under the ocean is like a thermal layer, and beneath the thermal layer is like more ocean.
Oh yeah,
what you've got to do when you watch it. Yeah.
The basic premise of the Meg 1 is that there is an ocean underneath the ocean.
And in that ocean are like big sharks, because they couldn't like cross the thermosphere or something, so they just grew bigger. There's more oxygen or something. This is not a movie for you to think about science at any point. Do not think about the science of what's being proposed to you, especially one point. But they basically they develop like subs and mech suits to go through the thermal layer because they want to like research it. And it turns out like they want to research the Meg behavior, which is they're trying to learn more about. And then of course, this being a giant shark movie, there's an evil conglomerate, in this case a mining company, who are doing bad things. And so it's the good eco warriors versus the bad capitalists, with not just giant sharks, but a whole menagerie of giant creatures. This is basically Jules Verne, before writing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, watched Die Hard and Jurassic Park and went, holy shit, that stuff is awesome. I'm going to incorporate that into 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So this is like my favorite kind of sequel, where it's clearly foreign money. So it's really interesting when the money is foreign. The foreigners are treated much better in English-speaking movies than when it's Western money. It is a swing for the hills sequel. It is a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea movie. It's not a giant shark movie, which is going to determine how you feel about this film, I know. But then you've got this, like, the middle of this movie is kind of Die Hard on an oil rig, and then the last third of this movie is giant shark palooza, absolute lunacy, with Jason Statham keeping a straight face at all times. When I tell you I love this film, I want you to understand that I mean it like when I say I love my children. That I understand this is not a good movie. This is a great movie. This is the like pure escapism. I had the biggest smile on my face as it referenced one after another of my favorite 80s movies and just smushed them all together and pretended it was fine. There's one point that is so mind-bogglingly stupid, the way that he saves them. It goes round stupid and comes back to being genius until you're not sure what's true and what's real anymore. Like, you're through the looking glass, you're in the Matrix. This is Jason Statham free diving at 25,000 feet and jousting with Megs on jet skis and then fighting them in mech suits. This is everything I want from a giant monster movie. And trust me, I haven't spoiled a thing. I have not spoiled a moment of this movie because the facts don't matter. It's just everything that's put in front of your eyeballs. Get drunk, get popcorn, watch this movie. Now, I understand you didn't like it quite as much.
Let me just say that I love this for you. Because it's not a good movie.
It's not a good movie.
But it's not even a
great movie.
It's not even so bad that it's good.
No, but it's not trying to be.
Here's the thing. If you're going to sell me a movie that has giant sharks, what I would like to see in that movie is giant sharks.
There are some. There's a few.
No, man. Like, let me get. So this movie is 2 hours long, which for this kind of movie, just for the record, is approximately 30 minutes longer than it needs to be. But also, the first 3/4 of it are undersea resource extraction conspiracy plot, and the last 30 minutes is everything Simon is saying.
You've missed Die Hard in the middle.
The last 30 minutes of this movie are everything I wanted the Meg 2 to be. The first 90 minutes of this movie are a really bad version of like undersea resource extraction conspiracy theory. And like, I get that it's a hard place for them to be in, because I know that like the Meg 1 is basically Jaws, but it's fucking huge.
It really is.
And you can't just do that again, right? And they can't just like do like Deep Blue Sea, but it's actually, they could just do Deep Blue Sea, but it's fucking huge. That would have been incredible. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a moment at the start of this film where they could have just done that. They could have just veered that way, and I think I would have liked it more. But like, this is a movie that shows you a glimpse of a giant octopus in the first 20 minutes, and you don't see it again until the last 20 minutes. It's so frustrating. And it's just so, like, the last 30 minutes, I would argue, if you want to watch this movie, just skip forward to the last 35 minutes.
No.
Because they'll give you just enough context to understand the last 30. Because the first 90 minutes of this movie are boring as fuck. And that's honestly...
Okay, no. All right.
Honestly, my problem with this movie, it's so boring. There's nothing interesting happens.
It's not boring, but I think a lot of it is about expectations. And I grant you, this movie is named after a giant shark. It's a sequel to a giant shark attack, and the giant shark really plays very little part in the first 2/3 of this movie.
But you're saying that like there's other giant animals, and there are, but again, they don't show up in a meaningful way until the last 30 minutes. Like nothing. And this movie just does not work on the level that it needs to work on based on what it's trying to be.
This movie, instead of being the giant shark being the threat, they saw Jurassic Park and went, "What if we had like velociraptors, but swimming. Like under what if we had a velociraptor attack, but like under the water? That worked really well in Jurassic Park. The whole movie is like that. It's like Ben Wheatley, who I can't. And like the shock when I saw directed by Ben Wheatley, I'm like, he's just gone. Yeah, we'll take this bit. They'll get attacked by like these kind of devolved crocodile things. It doesn't matter. Like, you're right. If you're expecting this to be a giant shark movie, and it's going to bother you if it's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea meets Jurassic Park bothers you, then you're not going to get on with this film.
Yeah, but again, if it was a good version, if it was an even passable version of that, if it was not fucking boring, like the first shot, the first shot of the movie the first scene of the movie is legitimately incredible, and then there's 90 odd minutes of boring. And then there's 30 minutes of bonkers giant animal mayhem at a Chinese resort called Fun Island, which is a resort for the ultra rich. And that the last 30 minutes is legitimately some of the most fun cinema I've seen all year. It's just getting between that first 3 minutes and the last 30 minutes. 90 minutes of boring. And it's
so that's the only thing we disagree with.
It's too much to forgive for me. I couldn't get past it.
I was like a little schoolboy the whole time. Didn't find it boring at all. I'm like, okay, now it's Die Hard, sure. Like it's gone from like Jules Verne, Jurassic Park, and now it's Pacific Rim, and now it's Die Hard, and now it's just Jason Statham carries this. The line delivery, the scripting in this movie is so bad. The line editing delivery is so bad, and it is just glorious. And I think,
but honestly, if it was 20% worse, it would be a better movie. Because then at least it wouldn't be. Because at
I
least
don't even know how that works.
Because then at least it would be interestingly bad instead of just kind of lazy adaptation. Like everything you're saying is true, but every version of it, taking something from another film and doing it, is the laziest version of that. There's no creative spark in any of it. So if it was 20% worse, or at least 20% more excited about doing it, it would be a much better film. But it's not. It's that 90 minutes is just boring, and I was so disappointed because I love, as you well know, I love movies with giant animals attack, like Jurassic Park, Godzilla, King Kong, legitimately one of my favorite movies of all time. This movie should be the easiest sale in the world for me.
No,
and it's just not.
See, I love adventure into unknown Jules Verne kind of thing. So this is exactly for me.
But this doesn't even care. That's the problem.
It does. No, it does. It does exactly that. It does.
No, it doesn't.
It does 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It literally does. He's in a sub going into this place with giant animals.
The place we've been before. The place we've been before with the stuff we've seen before.
Well, they did more.
Except there's evil people drilling for,
I know.
It's
how did the base get down there? How did they even get this place that no one's been through before?
None of it makes. I mean, and I'm on board usually with films that don't need to make a lick of sense for me to like them. But this movie is again, it's just the laziest, most obvious versions of. Everything you're saying is true, but it's just the worst possible version of all those things.
There's a great moment where the antagonist explains why he's pissed at Jason Statham. Don't you remember me? I am and even Jason Statham, when he's explained to it, can't hide his look of so what? And there's we're not given any more context than you remember when you put me in jail, and he's like, no. Okay, well that's why I'm pissed.
Well, and there's the whole scenes and there's a lot of really weird choices, but there's a great scene. There's a legitimately fun scene at the beginning where you're right. Jason Statham is an eco warrior. He's infiltrated the ship and he kicks the living shit out of a bunch of guys. And but that scene has no context, and it feels very tacked on to the rest of the film. It's we need something to happen in the first 30 minutes. Let's have Jason Statham kick the shit out of a bunch of guys. Yeah, that's fine. Let's do that. Great. Well, yeah, and also he's now adopted the young girl from the first one, and their explanation about the mother not being there is oh, she's dead now.
Yeah, she died.
She died on her way back to her home planet, I guess. Like
But
clearly,
it's got
like that actor, I can't remember her name now off the top of my head, but she had some like troubles right around the same time the film was
Li Bingbing,
yeah,
yeah,
being
yeah,
shot, and they're just like, oh, she's just not here. She's just not
yes,
here. She
she's
died
dead.
now. She's dead now. And
But
like,
it does have,
there's one legitimately great joke which comes before the last 30 minutes, which is there's a character called DJ, um, who's the black one from the first movie.
yeah,
Like,
he really is. He's
and
written that
like,
way too.
and he has this backpack full of survival gear, and like he has all the things that you would ever need to survive any particular situation. And someone at one point asks him like, "Why do you have this bag?" And his answer is basically, "I lived through the first movie," and like
Yeah,
that's legitimately great. Don't get
it
me wrong,
is. Yeah,
but like these moments are so few and far between. In the like,
yeah.
and again, don't get me wrong, the last 30 minutes of this movie are a blast,
Hmm.
but it is not enough for me to like it. I'm so disappointed by this movie because I legitimately love the first one. I have rewatched the first movie a number of times. I own it. It is
Yeah.
a fun as hell movie, that knows exactly what it is and leans into all the things that it is. And I feel like this movie doesn't do that. Like if it knows what it is, it doesn't lean in enough, or it just doesn't know exactly what it wants to be. Like it's one of those two things, and I can't put my finger on exactly what
Oh,
it
it's
is.
schizophrenic. No, it's schizophrenic as fuck.
Yeah,
It
it
steals
doesn't.
from so many different movies
Yeah, it doesn't.
gloriously.
It doesn't know what it is or what it wants to be, and as a result, the whole thing suffers. And again, there's a solid 90-minute stretch of where like I was so bored, and then the last 30 minutes happens, and it's great, and it's just not enough to rescue it for me at all. So there it is.
Oh man, I mean, I'm not shocked at all that we feel exactly as we feel about this movie, because this is made for me like completely ridiculous throwaway mishmash that is adventuring and then Die Hard and then Triple X with sharks on a beach, like the
Yeah,
side
but
map, and Jason Statham like ties all this, glues it all together, and I love Cliff Curtis as well. I think he's brilliant, and it's just I loved it more than the first one.
I
Let
mean,
that sink in.
I also think that Wu Jing is generally pretty great in this film. I know he's not a guy who's really broken out in North American cinema, but he's a huge deal in Asia, and I think
Mhm.
he's very charismatic. And especially in that last 30 minutes where they call him to be like one of the charismatic actiony guys, he does
Yeah.
an amazing job. Um,
Hmm.
but again, I just can't get over how fucking bored I was. And again, this movie should be made for me. Like it's exactly my kind of shit, and it just does not work. And I'm swearing a lot because it makes me angry thinking about it. How much
Uh-huh.
yeah,
So
it's
how let's go to our star rating then. There might be slight difference here. So my star rating is ridiculous. Loved it more than the first. 4 stars. What are you going with?
2. I'll give it 2. I'll give it 2. One for the very first scene of the movie, I'll give it 1, and for the last 30 minutes, I'll give it another 1. Uh,
uh,
but yeah, it's
It's
not.
really interesting how we're both fundamentally saying the same thing. I don't agree that it's boring, but that's a subjective thing. We're fundamentally saying the same thing about the movie. It's just that all the pieces fit for me and they really didn't for you. And I think that that's going to be, dear listeners, your reaction too. You should definitely try and watch this movie, because I think you're either going to love it, even though it's really stupid and scientifically suspect in many places, or it's just not going to work for you at all.
But again, to put that in perspective, there's
Are you
lots
going to
of
support?
movies. There's lots of movies like that like. A very close example of that is there's a film that came out in. I'm gonna look it up. Um, it's called Skyfire. It's 2021. I watched it at Victoria Film
Oh,
Festival
that's a
2021.
good yeah. There's a sequel to that. It's meant to be good.
So Skyfire is a film where a very rich person, played by Jason Isaacs, it's a Chinese made movie, but a very rich person called Jason Isaacs builds a luxury resort for the uber rich over the top of an active volcano, and then the volcano erupts, and that's the whole
What?
fucking movie. That's the whole
What a
movie.
shock!
And if you go back on the site and find my review of it, the headline is literally Skyfire doesn't make a lick of sense, but it's still really fun. Like, so this kind of movie should work for me. Like, I am the target audience, and it's legitimately upsetting. I'm legitimately upset about how much I didn't connect with this movie.
I'm sorry you didn't love it as much as I did. That love for when a movie lands, it's a good feeling, and it's equally frustrating when it doesn't.
Yeah, I agree. Because this movie is bad.
I'm buying it. I'm so buying that.
Well, here's the kicker, actually. So we didn't go to the cinema to watch this, and I didn't get a screener, and my choices were
oh, no.
My choices were
so
to
sorry.
rent it for $25 or buy it for $30, and you know that I bought it for $30. So I own this movie,
Sorry.
and I'm 100% sure I will watch it again at some point, because
I bet you love it. I
I'm
bet you fall in love with this
I'm
movie.
all about, I'll revisit stuff just to make sure, like, it's fine. I don't, you know, I just have cats. I don't have kids. I have lots of free time, and I watch bad movies all the time. And this will certainly be one of them. But I can pretty much guarantee that halfway through the next time I watch this one, I'm going to be like, why am I just not watching the first one? Like, the first one is great. So
just let me tell you, when Shout Factory does their 4K like steel tin release of this, I'm all over it.
yeah, it's either going to be Shout Factory or Arrow Video, one of the two.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's move on to our second movie. Why don't you give us a rundown of this movie?
Okay, so our second film recently played. It debuted at the Venice Film Festival in Venice, Italy.
What?
I know, right?
Venice Film Festival in Venice.
Not Venice, California, but Venice, Italy. That's right.
Uh-huh.
And actually, it was nominated for the Golden Lion, but did not win. And it did win the what's it called, the best screenplay award at Venice, the Golden Ozella, I believe, is what's called.
Mm-hmm.
And this film is called El Conde, and it is the story of Pinochet, basically Augusto Pinochet, who is very famously the dictator who seized control of Chile in the 70s and ruled for decades, I believe, until he eventually died under house arrest. I think not that long ago, like 2015, 2005, I don't know, something fairly recently. But this movie reimagines him as a 300-year-old vampire who was born during the French Revolution and got a taste for oppression and went to South America and oppressed the nation. And that's it. That's the whole setup. There's not really that much more to it. It's shot in very sumptuous black and white by cinematographer Edward Lachman. It's written and directed. It's directed by Pablo Larraín, who you probably are aware of from films like Jackie. That's probably his most famous one in English. And written by Larraín and a guy called Guillermo Calderon. It's actually, I think, super sharply written, and it's, again, gorgeous to look at. It's incredibly well performed at certain points, and I did not vibe with it at all. And it's going to be impossible to talk about exactly why without spoiling it. So we're going to talk for a few minutes without spoilers. Then we'll probably do a short section where we do talk about some spoilers. But basically, I think for one, I think it's a sort of a failure of the pitch for me, because it's pitched as this, like, I'm using the word pitch too much, but it's sold as this, like, pitch dark satire that's very funny, and also just brutal, both in the way the characters behave and in satire, and very generously it is one of those four things. Right, in that it is very brutal. Like, there's a lot of really brutal violence in this, like, very, and not just like over the top brutal, but really mundanely brutal in a way that I think some people might not react that well to. But it was kind of one of those times where, like, there's a 300-year-old vampire flying around Santiago killing people, and it's not like big splatters of blood. It's like very matter of fact. Oh, that person is being eaten now, and that part of it I actually really liked. And I think that the main actor, especially, who is a guy called Jamie Vadell, who plays Pinochet, I think is legitimately great. And I think he's also like in his 80s or maybe even his early 90s. Yeah, he's 87 years old. Is legitimately great as Augusto Pinochet. But this movie is 110 minutes, and it is very, very slow. Like the pitch is sort of for this like fast paced, funny movie, and it does have a few moments of laugh out loud funny, but they're, again, as with the last film, very few and far between. And I it just doesn't. It's very much a vibes movie, will be the way to say this, and I did not vibe with it at all. I don't know, like it did not work for me. And I think we talked about this a little bit before the show, and I think you'll probably expand on it. But I think part of the problem is that despite being a satire, the movie still kind of places, of all people, Pinochet in a place where I'm meant to have sympathy for him, and fuck that. I just,
Yeah.
it doesn't really work. I wouldn't go like, it's interesting because you can definitely tell that they're trying not to make him sympathetic, but they end up making him sympathetic. I don't know what else to tell you. It just happens. And so, despite all the stuff that works in its favor, it does not. I was just unable to vibe with it. And I think if you are able to vibe with it, I think it might be really great. I would love that for you, dear listener, but I did not vibe with it at all. I don't know, Simon. Feel free to expand or disagree with me on any particular.
I'm just letting you go.
Yeah,
Like,
it's difficult to say.
I just want to blow into the microphone. Let's start stylistically. There's a lot to like here, like technically. So I thought it was really interesting how it's a very clever mix of different storytelling devices. So you've got the black and white sort of German industrialist kind of framing and mostly black and white filmmaking. You've got, and the gore as well is very sort of classic Nosferatu. Some great practical effects. It's extremely graphic, so that's going to turn some people off. Not in a horror movie. I think you hit the nail exactly on the head. It's a straightforward, mundane, graphic quality that it doesn't. It's unflinching and it's kind of hard to watch. It doesn't have any of that sexiness that we talked about in the Voyage of the Demeter last week. So you've got some really interesting filmmaking as well. Some clear Wes Anderson influence in the flat framing and the movement across screen as well. You've got the script really reminded me of classic Lorca, like Blood Wedding, in the interactions, although a bit funnier. So I thought that was really interesting. I really liked the idiosyncratic, old-fashioned look mixed with most of it is set in modern day. So you've got like there's one point where they're preparing a feast, and these bottles of soda pop up to remind you that they're actually in modern day. So you've got a lot of idiosyncratic qualities here to show like time is meaningless to these people. So it's also meaningless to this film as well. So stylistically, I thought it was really interesting. However, fuck Pinochet and fuck anyone who wants to even attempt to make him a sympathetic character, even in what is a dark satire. Like, maybe if you know anything about what Pinochet did, Pinochet was as close to an actual monster that any human has ever been. And he's not alone in that club, but there is not. I'll disengage my reality for many things, but being asked to have sympathy for Pinochet is a stretch too far for me, even in this kind of movie, and it really tainted how I felt about this film. Because I did enjoy the performances. I did enjoy the dynamic of the kids coming back and trying to weed out the money, and the nun playing, like manipulating them all as well, and what her end game is. And I really enjoyed the French New Wave references and her design as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked being someone who studied film. I like seeing all the film study elements. It was really interesting, but every moment I was separated from my enjoyment of that by being presented a version of Pinochet where not everything was his fault. And then we'll talk about this later. It expands further in that direction and really hit the nail. If you pardon the vampire pun, it hit the last nail in that coffin for me when it was asking me to accept the end of this story with certain characters. And I thought the end was a bit confused as well. Its resolution was quite confused with all the ensemble coming together. But visually, technically, super interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I will say that it is intended to be satire, and I think it does to a certain extent work, but it doesn't have, to pardon the vampire pun, it doesn't have the teeth it needs in order to really work in the way it needs to, right? Like I don't think they're actively trying to make Pinochet sympathetic, but they end up making him sympathetic because they don't have the
Yes.
teeth. They don't have the film doesn't have the bite to make him
Yeah,
an evil
that's fair.
protagonist, right? Like, and
Yeah,
I know
they
there's
excuse
one
some
thing we're
things
gonna,
that should not be excused.
yeah, and I think we're probably going to disagree because there's another character that's introduced late in the film that to me they didn't do that with. Um, but it's hard to talk without spoilers, but like it's still not really accepted. Like there's one really funny gag in this movie, and it also leads to us to all of the problems with the movie as well in the third act. And it's difficult to talk about without spoiling it. Um,
Mm.
so I don't know, maybe we shouldn't, but it's I do think this is a movie you should maybe see for yourself. Like there's definitely things here that are worth seeing, and it's going to be on Netflix, so chances are most of you have Netflix and will have a chance to see it. Um, but I didn't vibe with it at all.
Mm.
I mean, I'm probably going to end up giving it, spoiler alert, I'm going to give it 2 stars, mostly based on the technical aspects. And
Yeah, exactly the same.
there is one genuinely amazing scene when one character is made into a vampire and and goes through that experience of being a vampire for the first time. One of the most beautiful things I've seen all year is that
Yeah,
sequence.
absolutely.
Just absolutely stunning. Um, but that's all I got. It's just all I got.
I mean,
It's too
it is
it's too
spectacular.
long.
Yeah.
It's too long. It's too slow, and it does not have the it doesn't have the bite it needs to be. It's not a biting satire. It's afraid. It's not. It doesn't go far enough in any other aspect. Um, and as a result, it's more than a little bit disappointing. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I
It
don't.
makes a decision in incorporating the elements of Pinochet's life. It pulls back from pointing the finger at him, and I'm like, it's well documented. It's really, really well documented what that man did to that country and the people. And I just think there's no version of that I can watch where I can watch the character presented as Pinochet and go, oh yeah, maybe he wasn't like entirely to blame. Like, no.
And the frustrating thing too is that you can definitely see the point they're trying to make about evil persisting in the world,
Yeah,
and about
totally.
how it persists because we let it persist. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and it does. It's interesting because in that it does outright point the finger at him, and then sort of doesn't at the same time. It's
Mm-hmm.
like some things it points the finger and sort of just goes, well, he's a vampire, and that's sort of it. And other times
Mm.
it's like, it's just, I don't know. I'm having a hard time articulating this. I don't really want to do a spoilery section to talk about it because I don't really. I do legitimately think there's one thing in the third act that I legitimately think is kind of a genius gag, and you can sort of see it coming if you're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the beginnings of it are very well executed,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the resolution of it, again, if the film had gone a little further with the rest of its themes, with the preceding 100 minutes, if the film had gone a little bit further and taken a few more chances, I think the ending would have been very impactful. And
Yeah, I
and
don't disagree at all. Actually,
and I don't, but it just didn't. So it doesn't. That's where I'm at. I don't think I need a spoilery section to talk about that. I don't necessarily want, like, if you really want to do one, let's just work it out right now. But like I don't think I need to explain much more than what I'm saying. I don't think adding spoilers to the mix is really going
okay,
to, other
all right.
than like there's part of the gag revolves around a person who legitimately makes most people in the Western world angry.
If
and
and me specifically,
yeah, and
like
anyone
there's a
with
person
an accent like Simon's specifically will be
mm,
very angry. Well,
of my age,
yeah,
uh, who there's one person from Pinochet's life who is also featured in this movie, and is also given some kind of sympathetic or at least non-miserable ending, and fuck that, like fuck that to the moon and back. And when
yeah,
you watch this
and
movie,
again,
you will understand completely.
that ending, if the film had just gone a little bit further with its commentary and satire, the ending would be very impactful and very appropriate. And it just doesn't.
Mhm.
I It doesn't go so far as to make the person we're talking about sympathetic, I don't think. Um,
Mhm.
but it also doesn't go far enough in making them unsympathetic to make the ending work the way I think it needs to. And what's really interesting is that Pablo Larraín and Guillermo Calderón, they're both Chilean. So
Mm.
um, it's not like
Yeah,
this is some kind of
I
outsider
know.
perspective, right?
I
It's
know that's difficult. It's really difficult. I was thinking the exact same thing. Like you've got to trust that they know their history. So what are they saying here? But it's just too. I
I
like to
mean,
be challenged, but there's
I
things
would
that I can't do.
I would legitimately like to. I don't think I have any friends who are Chilean, but I would love to speak to someone, especially someone maybe of our age or older, who lived through Pinochet's rule. I would love to talk to someone like that for about this movie. I would love to see what their perspective, because maybe we're
Yeah.
just missing. Maybe there's a cultural context that we just can't understand. Being
Uh,
middle-aged white dudes from Canada and Britain, maybe we just can't understand parts of it. But at the same
but
time, some of this
I
shit is
understand
pretty
enough.
is some of it's most of it's universal enough that I understand enough. And even again, even just on a surface level, it's too long with nothing happening. Like it's very, and
Mhm.
I'm fine with movies that are pretty light on plot, but like nothing happens in this movie and it's not funny enough or interesting enough to make that work.
Mm.
So it's a very frustrating movie because it's it's like good adjacent. It's so close to being great. Like it's not,
Yeah, I
if
really. Yeah,
it wasn't as disappointing as it is, it would be legitimately great. Like the
yeah.
difference between, like, there's no 3-star rating in this movie. It was either it's a 2-star movie, and with like a slight nudge, it would be a 4-star movie. But it doesn't have that nudge, so it's a 2-star movie, and I find it really frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. I was really into it until I realized what it was doing, and I just the disgust I felt, and then that is when something else happened. I was already going down the line of no, I can't see Pinochet in this way. I refuse to accept Pinochet in this way. And then something else happened, and then the ending happened. I'm like, no, just no. That these people do not deserve this. They deserve
Yeah,
other things that many people would wish on them, but not this. And you're right. I think the film is a little misdirected in how it approaches the horror, the true horror of these people's lives, which should be translated into a movie that's an allegory of evil persisting, and it kind of pulls back from that, which is the weird thing.
and again, I would. This is just semantics, but I would argue it's not that it pulls back; it's just that it never goes far enough. Like it's never intending to go far enough.
Well, I mean, Sure.
And that's
the same thing from different directions, isn't it?
yeah. It's again just I'm arguing semantics here, but it's as a result, it's a little disappointing. Although I do look forward to watching that one scene on YouTube roughly a bazillion times because the one scene where the one character becomes a vampire for the first time is legitimately gorgeous, like legitimately an amazing piece of film work, and I imagine will be the scene that we all like remember and talk about.
And it's very French New Wave. So if you're into like the Truffaut stuff, and she's got a Jane Birkin haircut, and it's just beautiful. It's stunning. If you have Netflix, maybe just skip to that bit. It's got like you can avoid the gore for the most part, and it's really lovely.
I mean, and to be clear, like I think some of you will probably like this. I'm 100% on team see it for yourself, and I hope you disagree with me/us. But I'm not going to recommend you watch it, but like I think some of you will like it. What can I say? But for me, it just was a little disappointing, or a lot disappointing, depending on how I'm feeling moment to moment. So 2 stars for me, 2 stars for you.
2 stars for me, for the technical aspects, which are really good.
Yeah, and again, for me, it's basically 1 star for the technical stuff and 1 star for the few things that do legitimately work. Those things are great. The things that work really, really, really work, and the stuff that doesn't. Anyway, well, I think that's it for the show.
We can't really say much more.
Yeah, I can't really say much more without going into spoilerton, and I don't think we need to. So let's cut it there. That's 2 movies that I thought were bad, and 1 that Simon loved and 1 he didn't love. So there you go. Thank you so much for listening. We're very glad you're here, whether you're a new listener or an old listener. But if you'd like what you've heard, please recommend us to your friends. Hit the subscribe button on your podcast player of choice. Give us a 5-star review for this episode or for the show. Those are the things that get us out in front of more earballs and help us immensely. And once again, if you'd like to help more directly, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/MC Simpson, and we do have bonus chats basically every week and again, it's $2 Canadian a month. It's not, I don't think it's a big ask. It's a bargain to hear our lovely voices. You can find us on the socials. There's too many to list now, so we'll post links in the show notes to my homepage, which is stretched.ca, and to Simon's homepage, which is temporarypen.com. And do visit the homepage for this episode at awesomefriday.ca. There are going to be JustWatch-powered streaming links, which are another thing that if you go to our website and click the link to watch it, that also helps us keep the lights on. So please feel free to do that. Last but not least, we record this here in Vancouver on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And that is the whole show. So thank you so much for listening and for joining us on this awesome Friday.
Thank you. Bye.